So you have an early pick in your fantasy football drafts and you want to know how you can come away from that draft feeling good about your team and having a good chance to win your fantasy football championship. Now the good news for you is I've been drafting team after team after team for months over on Underdog Fantasy, and I've come up with the perfect strategy for drafting a team when you have a pick in the early parts of the round, more specifically the 101 through the 104. So what I want to do today is I want to take some time to talk about the draft strategy, talk about the ADP pockets that you could be targeting certain players at certain positions, and the ideal roster construction on how you should be building these rosters when you have that early pick. So without wasting any more time, let's just hop right into today's video and let's start talking about early pick draft strategy. So the first part of this strategy is going to be starting your draft with 2 wide receivers in the first and the second round. So looking at the ADP currently in this first round, it's a great spot to be. It's heavily dominated by the elite wide receiver ones in fantasy football. And this is even more so true for those underdog leagues where you do have 3 starting wide receivers because it just emphasizes the wide receiver position. Now, obviously, when you have the 101, looking at CMC, he is a great pick. And if you have the 101, he is probably the pick that you want to make. But the reality is, unless you have the 101, you're just not getting him. Oftentimes, he is the unanimous #1 pick in fantasy football. So if you have the 102, the 103, the 104, you're more likely looking at these wide receivers. Now, you have guys here like CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think it's pick your poison here. Whichever one of those guys you like, those are the guys that you should pick. I think all of these guys have elite #1 overall wide receiver type of upside. So pick your poison here, take whoever you want. But after you do that, you have to start focusing on round 2. And like I said, you should be looking at a second wide receiver here in the second round. Now, this is where it is going to set us up for success for the rest of the way because the rest of our strategy is built off of this double wide receiver start. Now, there's a massive tier of wide receivers here. You have guys on the board like Nico Collins, Chris Olave, Deebo Samuel, Jalen Waddle, many more players as well. But I think focusing on targeting the wide receivers in those high scoring offenses, kind of like the Houston Texans, the San Francisco 49ers, even the Miami Dolphins in the Jalen Waddle type of pick, those are where I want to put my focus because there's going to be lots of fantasy points to go around in those offenses. So here with your second round pick, you should be looking at guys like Deebo, Ayuk, Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle. Those are the selections that I'm the most comfortable making here. And now by doing this, you're going to give yourself a lot of flexibility, especially in rounds 3 through 6, where we can kind of look at some of these other positions and start picking our poison as to where we want to attack and try and gain leverage over our league mates in these rounds. Now, I myself, like I said, I've been drafting a ton of these teams. I have 10 teams specifically that I pulled for this, my most 10 recent teams that have drafted from the 101 to the 104. And here's some examples of 2 wide receiver starts, even sometimes 3 wide receiver starts that you can have here because of the ADP currently. And you see right now on these early round picks, I'm getting about 70% of my teams that have that 2 wide receiver start. And as I mentioned, I'm focusing on those wide receivers in those high scoring offenses. So you see a Tyreek Hill, Brandon Ayuk duo, Jamar Chase, Devontae Adams, Jamar Chase, Nico Collins, CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins, and Deebo Samuel in that 3 wide receiver start. Then you have CeeDee Lamb, Deebo, Jamar, Deebo, Justin Jefferson, DJ Moore. But you get the point. We're kind of targeting that 2 wide receiver start, and that's what's giving us the advantage. Now, that's going to take us to our second point of this strategy when you're drafting from these early picks, and that is in round 3 and round 4, we want to try and focus on getting our running back. And I'd say there's also a caveat to this as well because we want to try and get 3 running backs in the top 100 in ADP, but 2 of them have to be in the top 50. That's why I say rounds 3 and round 4. So in round 3, there's 2 obvious names that I think you should be drafting almost every single time if they're available at your current pick. Those names are going to be Kyren Williams and Devon Achane. Now, as I mentioned, these guys possess major upside. We're talking about guys who can break fantasy football on any given week, so they need to be the top priorities. But what about if those guys are gone and they're not available when it's your pick? Maybe you have that 304 and they're not available at that pick. Well, this is where I say go with the 3 wide receiver start. And that's why you saw some of those teams have 3 wide receivers on them. And it's because Kyren Williams and Devon Achane were gone at that ADP. So the plan should be drafting one of those guys with the elite upside. But if you can't get one, go with the 3 wide receiver start because you're still going to be able to get our strategy completed if you go with the wide receiver in the 3rd round as well. But obviously you should be prioritizing that running back. Now, as I mentioned, in the 3rd and 4th round, we are trying to grab the running back. So if you haven't grabbed one in the 3rd round and you're looking at what running backs you need to grab in the 4th round, Travis Etienne has to be the #1 priority for you. I think he has true RB1 upside and he's a guy who's going in that 4th round. So those are kind of the picks that you should be looking at in the 3rd and 4th round. But the overarching theme here is grabbing 2 of those guys in rounds 3 and 4. Now, looking back at those 10 teams that we drafted, you'll see a lot of the main focus was grabbing those 3 running backs in the top 100 of ADP, and more specifically grabbing 2 of them within the top 50. Now again, about 70% of the teams that I drafted were able to accomplish this goal to some degree. And even the team that I was able to use the 101 on Christian McCaffrey, I was still able to grab an Isaiah Pacheco, landing another top 50 running back in ADP for there as well. I just switched the strategy there in the second and third round and went with the wide receivers. But again, once I grab those 2 wide receivers and I grab those 2 running backs in rounds 3 and 4, I'm okay not grabbing that third running back until we get close to that 7th or 9th round of ADP, especially because there's a pocket of running backs there at that ADP that I think are worth targeting for your running back 3. Now, looking at some of the teams here, again, you see on the screen, we have guys like Kyren Williams and Travis Etienne. You have Devon Achane at Etienne, Kyren, Montgomery, Kyren, Jacobs, Etienne, Rashad White, McCaffrey, Pacheco, Kyren, Etienne. You see what we're trying to do here. We're trying to grab 2 or 3 of these guys and kind of build this running back room up with the high upside type of guys. Now, we kind of already hinted at it, but I said rounds 7 through 9 for the running back 3, and you might be asking, why are we going rounds 7 through 9? Now, there's really 2 parts on how I can answer this question, but the first one really is the ADP pocket that I was talking about. There is a massive cluster of running backs in this range, and you can see them on the screen. There's guys like Montgomery, Kamara, Jones, Stevenson, Najee, James Conner, Zamir White, all of these guys who have enough upside that if you grab them as a running back 3, you feel like you have the upside and the security at the running back position where you're comfortable just using these guys as an RB3 on your team, and they will be plugged in during those bye weeks, during the injuries. You can stream them throughout the year. It gives you a lot of flexibility at that running back position. And this is good, especially when you're drafting one of those riskier running backs with the high upside like Kyren Williams and Devon Achane as your running back 1. So with that being said, it doesn't really matter to me who you draft in this range. You kind of get to pick your poison, pick your flavor, whoever you like. I'm not mad at you depending on who you pick, but just grab one of these guys in this range as your RB3. And if you're looking for my advice and who I like to target in this round, there's guys like Najee Harris, James Conner, and DeAndre Swift who I like to take in that 8th round, which kind of gives me a little bit more flexibility to grab some high upside wide receivers in that 6th and 7th round. Now, I said it was a little bit of a 2-part answer. This is the second part, but it kind of takes us to our third point here in this strategy, and that's that you want to target an elite tight end in round 5. And by grabbing that third running back in round 8, it allows us to grab the elite tight end in round 5. So ideally, up to this point, you've drafted 2 wide receivers, you have 2 running backs on the roster as well, and here's where you're going to get a significant advantage over those league mates of yours. There is a pocket of tight ends here in ADP that I absolutely love in fantasy football, and you see here, there's guys like Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, and Dalton Kincaid, who I truly do believe have the overall tight end 1 type of upside, and you're getting them in this 5th round. You're not paying the same price as you would pay for a Sam Laporta or a Travis Kelce. Now, getting one of these guys is going to be crucial to the strategy, especially because, as I mentioned, this is one of my favorite tiers to draft a positional advantage at a onesie position, and just based where your pick is currently in this round, you are almost guaranteed to always have the opportunity to at least get one of these guys on your team. Now, it may mean you don't get to pick which one you get. It may be just taking the last guy in this tier, but I'm okay with any of these guys in this tier, so it doesn't matter to me if I have to pick the last one on the board. Now, again, looking at those last 10 teams, you'll see I targeted the elite tight end on those rosters on 60% of these teams. And even in one of these drafts, I did have Travis Kelce fall to me. You see his ADP's 38. I got him at 51. That's most likely not going to happen in your drafts, but you'll see that I targeted that elite tight end and he fell well below ADP there. So now the caveat to taking one of these elite tight ends on your roster means that you have to be willing to let that second tight end on your roster kind of be a flyer at the end of your drafts. You don't want to double invest on a onesie position. So you'll see that on all of these teams, I'm taking flyers on guys like Noah Fant, Isaiah Likely, Cade Otton, and spending the high draft capital on one of the elite tight ends, but fading the second tight end on my roster very far down into the draft. And this is so I can focus my efforts on the running back and the wide receiver position in those middle to late rounds. And so now moving on to the 4th part of this strategy, and a key part of this strategy as well, is grabbing 2 quarterbacks in between rounds 8 and 12. So as we've already mentioned, you've already had your double wide receiver to start the draft. You got 2 running backs in rounds 3 and 4. You grabbed an elite tight end in round 5. You filled out some depth in round 6 and 7 at the wide receiver position, grabbing your running back 3 in round 8, and now you are at round 9, and this is where you're going to start looking for that quarterback. Now, as I said, it's ideal you grab 2 of these guys. The strategy here is you want to grab one of these guys at that round 8 and 9 turn, preferably with that 9th round selection, and that will allow you to grab one of the QBs on the board here in ADP. You see guys like Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love, who I think all possess that weekly quarterback 1 upside. And by just grabbing one of these guys at that turn, it allows you with the other pick on that turn to just continue filling out depth depth at that running back or wide receiver position. Now, the second part is that you want to grab the other quarterback at that 11 and 12 turn, because there's a pocket of QBs there in that ADP that have guys like Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, Justin Herbert, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, and a lot of these are very solid quarterbacks that are tied to high-scoring offenses, more specifically the Tuas, the Jared Goffs, and the Matthew Staffords. So grabbing your second quarterback here at that turn allows you again to grab another running back or wide receiver to continue filling out depth, and it gives you that second QB in this range that I'm talking about, so you have a very solid quarterback room. So looking at some examples of these double quarterback rooms in the middle rounds, you'll see if you successfully grab two of these guys in the middle rounds, you'll come away with two solid quarterback options, and you won't have to sacrifice a lot of the running back and wide receiver depth while still having an elite difference maker at the tight end position as well. So as you can see, the QB rooms, they kind of look something like this. My favorite pairings being a combination of Kyler or Dak plus a QB2 of a guy like Tua Tagovailoa or maybe Matthew Stafford. I think you see here, I got a lot of Dak and Stafford, a lot of Dak and Tua. That's kind of the vibe that I'm going with in these quarterback rooms. So those are kind of the main points of the strategy and how you should be tailoring your drafts if you are picking from that 101 to that 104 spot. And if there's a round that we didn't talk about specifically in this video, just know that I'm probably filling out running back or wide receiver depth, or I'm just going to grab that very late round backup tight end. But the majority of those picks that we don't talk about, I'm just grabbing the running backs and the wide receivers. So I'll throw some of these draft boards up on the screen right now so you guys can see them. I'm going to do this quickly, so if we're going too fast and you just want to pause the video to look at that draft board for a minute, feel free to do that. But I'll also kind of just recap the main points of this strategy when drafting from these early picks while you guys are looking at those draft boards. And really, let's kick it off by saying the number one point, you need to start that draft with two wide receivers, and for your second wide receiver, you should focus on that high scoring offense. San Francisco, Houston, Miami, those types of offenses for your second wide receiver. Now you're hopefully going to follow those two wide receivers up in round 1 and round 2 with two running backs in round 3 and round 4, hopefully being able to get a high upside guy like Kyren Williams or Devon Achane, and then you pair it with a Travis Etienne, Rashad White, Isaiah Pacheco type of running back in round 4. Round 5 is where you're going to grab that elite tight end 1. You're going to get one of the guys in either Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, or Trey McBride, or if one of the other guys, Laporta or Kelsey Falls, grab them as well. But those are the tight ends that you should be targeting in that 5th round to give you a difference-making player at a onesie position. Rounds 6 through 8, we're targeting that wide receiver depth, and we're looking for the running back 3 on our roster, obviously targeting that tier that I mentioned where Najee Harris, DeAndre Swift, James Conner, all of those guys are coming off of the board. And then lastly, as we continue to fill out the running back and the wide receiver depth on this roster, you should be looking to get two quarterbacks between rounds 9 and 12, trying to target your first quarterback in that round 8 and 9 turn, and then trying to find that second quarterback at the round 11 and 12 turn. So if you do that successfully, you should have a roster that you feel very good about and a roster that is going to be very competitive in your league to hopefully help you win a championship here in 2024. And as you can see, I drafted all of these teams over on Underdog Fantasy. If you want to practice for your upcoming draft, you want to try out this strategy for yourself, go sign up over on Underdog Fantasy. I actually have a promo code for you guys. If you sign up using code LEAGUEFFB, they will give you up to $250 in bonus cash, so you can just draft a bunch of teams. They're real money drafts. It costs about $3 minimum to hop into these drafts. Low stakes, but people take them very seriously, so they're good practice for your home league. But with that being said, that's all I have for you guys today. So if you did enjoy the video, if you found it helpful, go ahead and hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. Also, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel, because if you don't pick between the 101 and the 104, we are also going to be doing the middle rounds and the late round picks here over the next couple of weeks. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss those pieces of content. And last but not least, if you need help when you're on the clock in your draft, or just need help prepping for your draft, I do have a free Discord linked in the description. You can go sign up down there. Like I said, it's free to join. There is no risk in doing that. And we have a dope community of people that want to help you out as well. And it is the best place to get in contact with me when you need help from me specifically. So with all of that out of the way, I have nothing else for you today. So I will see you guys on our next video. But until then, peace out.